The morning bell rang at 5:30, just like it had for the past 63 years. Sister Agnes slowly opened her eyes in the small, simple room that had been her home since she was 22 years old. The wooden cross on the wall caught the first rays of sunlight streaming through her tiny window. At 85, her joints creaked as she sat up on the narrow bed, but her spirit remained as strong as ever. Down the hallway, she could hear the other sisters beginning their day. The younger ones moved quickly, their footsteps light on the old wooden floors. Sister Agnes took her time. There was no rush anymore. She had learned long ago that life was not about speed, but about purpose. She dressed in her simple gray habit, the same style she had worn for decades. The fabric was soft from countless washings, and there were tiny patches where careful hands had mended small tears. Her fingers, now wrinkled and spotted with age, fumbled slightly with the buttons. These same hands had done so much over the years, wiped children's tears, planted countless flowers in the convent garden, and held the hands of the dying. But there was something else these hands had done, something that none of the other sisters knew about, something she had kept as her own private secret for more than 60 years. The convent of St. Mary's sat on a quiet hill outside the small town of Millbrook. It was a peaceful place surrounded by oak trees and rolling green fields. Sister Agnes had been the groundskeeper here for the past 40 years, ever since she grew too old to teach the young children in the convent school. She loved working in the gardens, watching the seasons change, seeing new life spring from the earth each year. The other sisters often found her there in the early morning, kneeling among the roses or carefully watering the vegetable garden that fed their small community. They would smile and wave, thinking of her as the quiet one, the sister who preferred plants to people, soil to conversation. They had no idea who she really was. In the evenings, after dinner and prayers, when the other sisters retired to their rooms to read or write letters, Sister Agnes would make her way to the old chapel. It was a beautiful space built over 100 years ago, with tall stained glass windows and wooden pews that had been polished smooth by generations of faithful hands. At the front of the chapel stood an old piano. It was not a fancy instrument. The wood was worn, some of the keys were slightly yellowed, and it needed tuning more often than the convent could afford. Most of the sisters walked past it without a second glance. To them it was just furniture, a leftover from the days when the convent had a proper choir. But to Sister Agnes, it was everything. She would sit on the old bench, her feet barely reaching the pedals, and place her weathered hands on the keys, and then magic would happen. The chapel would fill with music so beautiful, so perfect, that it seemed to come from heaven itself. She played the great classical pieces, works by composers whose names the other sisters had never heard. Her fingers, despite their age, moved with a grace and skill that would have amazed anyone who saw her, but no one ever did see her. She made sure of that. Sister Agnes had not always been Sister Agnes. Once, long ago, she had been Catherine Walsh, a young woman with dreams as big as the sky. She had grown up in a small apartment above her father's music shop in the heart of the city. Her parents had saved every penny they could to pay for her piano lessons, believing that their daughter had a gift that needed to be nurtured. They were right. By the time Catherine was 18, she was playing concerts in the city's finest halls. Music teachers spoke of her with reverence. There was talk of scholarships to the most prestigious music schools in the country. Some even whispered that she could become one of the great concert pianists of her generation, but life, as it often does, had other plans. Her father became ill when Catherine was 20. The medical bills ate up all their savings. The music shop struggled, and her mother worked double shifts at the local factory just to keep food on the table. Catherine knew that her dreams of musical fame would have to wait. She took a job teaching piano to children from wealthy families, playing at weddings and small events, anything to help support her parents. The money was never quite enough, but they managed. Then came the morning that changed everything. Catherine was walking to work when she passed the small church of St. Mary's. The door was open, and she could hear crying inside. Without thinking, she stepped through the doorway. Inside, she found a young mother with 3 small children. The woman was clutching a letter, tears streaming down her face. Her husband had been killed in an accident, the letter explained. She had no money, no family, no way to care for her children. Catherine sat with the woman for hours. She helped her contact the local charities, found her a temporary place to stay, and even gave her the small amount of money she had in her purse. It was not much, but it was something. As Catherine walked home that evening, she felt something she had never experienced before. The joy she got from helping that woman was different from the satisfaction she felt when she played a difficult piece perfectly. It was deeper, more complete. It filled a part of her soul that music, as much as she loved it, had never quite reached. Over the next few months, Catherine found herself drawn back to that church again and again. She started volunteering, helping with the children's programs, visiting the elderly, doing whatever needed to be done. The parish priest, Father Thomas, was an old man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He could see that Catherine was struggling with something. One evening, as Catherine was cleaning up after a community dinner, Father Thomas approached her. "You have a gift for helping people," he said quietly, "but I think you also have another gift. I have heard you playing the piano in the church when you think no one is listening." Catherine blushed. She had not realized anyone knew. "There are many ways to serve God," Father Thomas continued. "Some people serve through their music, sharing their gift with the world. Others serve through their actions, helping those who need it most. And some lucky few find a way to do both." That conversation planted a seed in Catherine's mind. Over the following year, as she continued to help at the church while supporting her family, she began to think about what truly mattered to her. Her father passed away that winter, and her mother followed 6 months later. Suddenly, Catherine was alone in the world, with nothing but her music and her faith. The choice, when it came, was not as difficult as she had thought it would be. On a crisp autumn morning, Catherine Walsh walked through the gates of the St. Mary's Convent for the last time as a lay woman. When she emerged from the chapel hours later, she was Sister Agnes, a new member of the religious community. She had made her choice. She would serve God through helping others, and her music would be her private gift to the Creator who had given her such talent. For 63 years, she had kept that promise. Through decades of teaching children, caring for the sick, and tending the gardens, she had never regretted her decision. Her music remained her secret companion, a source of joy and peace that she shared only with God in the empty chapel. But sometimes, late at night as she played in the darkness, Sister Agnes wondered what might have been. And sometimes, just sometimes, she wondered if God might have one more plan for her gift. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Sister Patricia, the youngest member of their community at just 28, came running into the garden where Sister Agnes was tending to the tomato plants. "Sister Agnes, Mother Superior wants to see everyone in the common room right away." Patricia's eyes were bright with excitement. "She has some kind of announcement." Sister Agnes wiped the dirt from her hands on her apron and followed the younger nun inside. The common room was buzzing with chatter as all 12 sisters gathered around Mother Superior, who stood holding an official-looking envelope. Mother Superior was a woman in her 60s, practical and kind but not given to drama. The fact that she had called an emergency meeting had everyone curious. "Sisters," she began, her voice carrying easily through the room, "I have received a letter from Bishop Harrison. As you know, our diocese is organizing a special charity event next month." The sisters nodded. They had heard rumors about some kind of fundraiser, but no one knew the details. "The event is called Music for Hope," Mother Superior continued. "It will be a concert featuring various performers from throughout our diocese. The money raised will go towards starting music programs in schools that cannot afford them, particularly in the poorer neighborhoods of the city." Sister Agnes felt her heart skip a beat. Music programs for children who could not afford them? She thought of her own childhood, of parents who had sacrificed so much to give her piano lessons, and of all the children who would never have that chance. "The bishop is asking each convent and parish to contribute in some way," Mother Superior went on. "Some will help with organizing, others with publicity. They are also looking for performers, anyone with musical talent who would be willing to share their gift for this worthy cause." The room fell silent. Most of the sisters were good at many things: teaching, gardening, bookkeeping, counseling. But music was not their strong suit. Sister Joan could carry a tune well enough to lead the evening hymns, and Sister Catherine played a simple guitar, but nothing that would be suitable for a formal concert. "Do any of you have musical abilities that might be appropriate for such an event?" Mother Superior asked, looking around the room. Sister Agnes felt her mouth go dry. Her hands, hidden in the folds of her habit, began to tremble slightly. This was it. This was the moment she had been unconsciously waiting for, perhaps for her entire religious life. But she could not speak. Sister Patricia raised her hand tentatively. "I used to play the flute in high school," she offered, "though I have not touched it in years." "That's something," Mother Superior nodded encouragingly. "Anyone else?" The silence stretched on. Sister Agnes could feel her heart pounding. She knew she should speak up. This was exactly the kind of cause that would have moved her deeply even as a young woman. Music education for children who could not afford it. It was as if God had designed this opportunity specifically for her. But 63 years of keeping her secret was not easy to overcome. Finally, Mother Superior sighed softly. "Well, perhaps Sister Patricia can dust off her flute and we can contribute in other ways. Sister Joan, you have a lovely voice. Perhaps you and Sister Patricia could work up something simple together." The meeting broke up and the sisters went back to their daily routines. But Sister Agnes could not concentrate on anything. As she knelt among the flowers, pulling weeds and watering the beds, her mind kept returning to the bishop's letter. That evening, after dinner and prayers, she made her way to the chapel as usual. But instead of sitting at the piano, she knelt in the front pew and stared up at the cross above the altar. "What do you want from me?" she whispered into the silence. "I gave up my music for you 63 years ago. I have served faithfully, never asking for anything in return. But now, this opportunity. It feels like you are asking me to choose again." The chapel was quiet except for the soft sound of wind through the oak trees outside. Sister Agnes had learned long ago that God rarely answered in dramatic ways. His voice was usually found in the small, quiet moments, in the feeling of rightness that came when you were following the path He had laid out for you. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the feeling she had experienced all those years ago when she had first decided to enter the convent. It had been a sense of peace, of knowing that she was exactly where she belonged. Now, thinking about the concert, about the children who would benefit from music programs, she felt that same sense of rightness beginning to stir in her chest. Sister Agnes opened her eyes and looked at the old piano. Its wooden surface gleamed softly in the candlelight. She had played on much finer instruments in her youth, but this old piano had been her faithful companion for so many years. It knew all her secrets, had heard all her prayers expressed through music. Slowly she stood and walked to the bench. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play one of her favorite pieces, a gentle, flowing melody that always brought her peace. As the music filled the chapel, she felt her doubts beginning to melt away. This was not about her. It had never been about her. Her musical gift was not something she owned, but something she had been entrusted with. For 63 years she had kept it safe, sharing it only with God in the quiet moments of the evening. But perhaps it was time to share it more widely. The thought terrified her. Sister Agnes had been a young woman when she last performed for an audience. She was now 85, with arthritis in her fingers and eyes that needed reading glasses. What if she had lost her ability? What if the years of playing alone in an empty chapel had made her forget how to connect with real people? What if she embarrassed herself and, worse, embarrassed the convent? But as she continued playing, another voice seemed to whisper in her mind. What if you do not try? What if this is the reason God has kept your gift alive all these years? What if this is the purpose you have been preparing for without even knowing it? Sister Agnes finished the piece and sat in silence for a long moment. Then, surprising herself, she began to smile. The next morning, she found Mother Superior in her office working on the monthly accounts. "Mother Superior," Sister Agnes said softly, "I would like to speak with you about the concert." Mother Superior looked up from her ledgers. "Of course, Sister Agnes. Do you have ideas for how we might help with the organization?" Sister Agnes took a deep breath. "Actually, I would like to volunteer to perform." Mother Superior's pen stopped moving. She looked at Sister Agnes with surprise and, if Agnes was not mistaken, a touch of concern. "Sister Agnes," Mother Superior said gently, "I appreciate your willingness to help, but performing in a formal concert requires a great deal of musical training and experience. This is not like leading evening prayers or singing hymns. There will be hundreds of people in the audience, including many who are quite knowledgeable about music." "I understand," Sister Agnes replied quietly, "but I believe I may have more musical experience than you realize." Mother Superior set down her pen entirely. "What do you mean?" Sister Agnes had never told anyone in the convent about her previous life. When she had entered 63 years ago, she had wanted to leave Catherine Walsh completely behind and become someone new. The Mother Superior who had welcomed her then had long since passed away, and none of the current sisters knew anything about her background before she took her vows. "Before I joined the community," Sister Agnes said carefully, "I was a pianist. I performed professionally for several years." Mother Superior's eyes widened. "You were a professional musician? Sister Agnes, why have you never mentioned this?" "It was a different life," Sister Agnes explained. "When I came here, I wanted to focus completely on my new calling. I did not think my previous career was relevant. But surely you have continued to play. Do you still have your skills?" Sister Agnes nodded toward the chapel. "I practice every evening after prayers. I have maintained my abilities." Mother Superior was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to process this unexpected revelation about a woman she had known for decades. "Sister Agnes," she said finally, "this is quite a surprise. I think perhaps you should speak directly with Bishop Harrison about this. If you truly have professional-level skills, this could be a wonderful contribution to the concert." "I would appreciate the opportunity to audition," Sister Agnes said. "I understand that my age might be a concern, but I believe my music could help raise money for those children." Mother Superior reached for her phone. "I am calling the bishop's office right now." The community center where the auditions were being held buzzed with activity. Young musicians in their 20s and 30s carried instrument cases and sheet music, their conversations filled with technical terms and references to prestigious music schools. The energy was electric, competitive, and intimidating. Sister Agnes stood near the entrance, clutching a small folder of sheet music that she had carefully copied by hand from memory. Her simple gray habit stood out starkly among the fashionable clothes and polished appearances of the other auditionees. Several people glanced at her curiously, clearly wondering what an elderly nun was doing at a musical audition. Behind a long table at the front of the room sat the selection committee. There was Mrs. Henderson, the wife of a prominent businessman and a well-known patron of the arts in the city. Next to her sat Professor Williams from the local university's music department, a man in his 50s with graying hair and an air of academic authority. The third member was Father Rodriguez, a younger priest who coordinated cultural events for the diocese. Sister Agnes approached the check-in table, where a young woman with a clipboard was organizing the schedule. "Name?" the woman asked without looking up. "Sister Agnes from St. Mary's Convent." The woman looked up, clearly surprised. She scanned her list twice before frowning. "I don't see you on here. Are you sure you registered?" "Bishop Harrison's office said they would add my name," Sister Agnes explained patiently. The woman called over to the committee table. "Mrs. Henderson? There's a sister here who says she's supposed to audition, but she's not on my list." Mrs. Henderson looked over with a puzzled expression. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, dressed in an expensive suit and wearing perfectly applied makeup. Her entire demeanor suggested someone who was used to dealing with only the finest things in life. "A sister?" Mrs. Henderson walked over, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. This audition is for the concert performers. Were you perhaps looking for the volunteer coordinator? We do need help with setup and cleanup." Sister Agnes felt her cheeks warm slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "No, ma'am. I'm here to audition as a performer. Bishop Harrison's office said they would contact you about adding my name to the list." Mrs. Henderson exchanged a glance with Professor Williams, who had joined them. There was a moment of awkward silence. "Sister," Professor Williams said in a tone that was trying to be kind but came across as condescending, "performing in a concert of this caliber requires years of professional training and experience. The audience will include some very knowledgeable music lovers, and frankly, the other performers are all quite accomplished." "I understand," Sister Agnes replied. "I do have musical training and experience." Mrs. Henderson looked doubtful. "Well, perhaps you could play something simple for the congregation at your convent? I'm sure that would be a lovely contribution. But this concert is really more for serious musicians." The dismissal was polite but clear. Sister Agnes felt a familiar sting of disappointment. The same feeling she had experienced countless times over the years when people made assumptions about her, based on her age and appearance. "If I could just have a few minutes to demonstrate, she said quietly. I believe you would find that I am quite serious about music. Professor Williams shook his head. Sister, we have a very tight schedule today. We have over 30 auditions to get through, all from trained professionals and advanced students. I really don't think— 5 minutes. Sister Agnes interrupted, her voice still gentle but with a note of firmness that surprised even her. Surely you can spare 5 minutes. Mrs. Henderson and Professor Williams looked at each other again. The line of waiting musicians was growing longer and several were beginning to look impatient. I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson said finally, but we simply don't have time for everyone who might want to participate. Perhaps next year you could register properly in advance. Sister Agnes nodded slowly. I understand. Thank you for your time. She turned to leave, her small folder of sheet music still clutched in her hands. But as she reached the door, something inside her rebelled against giving up so easily. She thought of all the children who would benefit from the music programs this concert would fund. She thought of her own childhood, of parents who had believed in her talent when others had doubted. She thought of 63 years of playing alone in an empty chapel, keeping a gift alive for reasons she was only now beginning to understand. Sister Agnes turned around and walked back to the registration table. Excuse me, she said to the young woman with the clipboard. What time do the auditions end today? 5 o'clock, the woman replied, looking puzzled. And they continue tomorrow? Yes, tomorrow from 9 to 5 as well. Sister Agnes nodded and left the community center. But instead of going home, she spent the day in the small park across the street, sitting on a bench and watching the musicians come and go. She said her prayers, read from her small prayer book, and thought about what she was trying to accomplish. She was not a young woman anymore. She could not compete with these polished performers in terms of appearance or marketing or connections, but she had something else. Decades of dedication, a lifetime of keeping her musical skills sharp even when no one was watching, and a deep understanding of what music could mean to people who had never had the chance to experience it. The next morning, Sister Agnes returned to the community center. The same young woman was at the registration table, and the same committee members sat behind their long table. When Mrs. Henderson saw her, a look of annoyance crossed her face. Sister, I thought we explained yesterday that we don't have room in the schedule for additional auditions. I was hoping, Sister Agnes said politely, that perhaps someone might not show up, and you could give me their time slot. Professor Williams sighed audibly. Sister, even if we had the time, I really don't think this is appropriate. This is a professional level event. But Father Rodriguez, who had been quiet during yesterday's exchange, spoke up. What instrument do you play, sister? Piano, Sister Agnes replied. And where did you receive your training? Sister Agnes hesitated. She had not talked about her previous life in so many years that the words felt strange in her mouth. I studied privately as a child and young adult. I performed professionally for several years before entering religious life. Father Rodriguez raised his eyebrows. How many years ago was this? I entered the convent in 1961, Sister Agnes said quietly. Mrs. Henderson laughed, though not unkindly. Sister, that was over 60 years ago. Surely you can't expect to perform at the same level after so many years away from music. I have continued to practice, Sister Agnes said, every day. Playing hymns for your community is quite different from concert performance, Professor Williams added. Sister Agnes felt her patience beginning to wear thin, but she kept her voice calm. I have not only played hymns. I have maintained my full repertoire. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of that morning's first scheduled auditionee, a young man carrying a violin case. Mrs. Henderson immediately turned her attention to him, effectively dismissing Sister Agnes. But Sister Agnes did not leave. She found a chair in the back of the room and sat down to wait. When the committee members noticed her still there an hour later, Professor Williams approached her. Sister, you really cannot just sit here all day. We have work to do. I am not disturbing anyone, Sister Agnes replied. I am simply waiting in case an opportunity arises. An opportunity for what? To show you that age and appearance are not the only measures of musical ability. Professor Williams stared at her for a moment, then shook his head and walked away. Sister Agnes spent the entire day in that chair. She watched audition after audition, listening to talented young performers play pieces she knew by heart. Some were technically proficient but lacked emotion. Others had passion, but made small errors in their execution. A few were truly exceptional, but none of them, she thought to herself, understood music the way someone who had spent 63 years turning to it for comfort and spiritual connection could understand it. As the day wore on, some of the other musicians began to notice the elderly nun who sat quietly in the back, never moving except to shift position occasionally or to bow her head in what appeared to be prayer. A few smiled at her kindly. Others seemed puzzled by her presence. Near the end of the day, one young woman approached her during a break. "Excuse me, sister," she said hesitantly. "Are you waiting to audition?" Sister Agnes nodded. "I'm hoping for the opportunity, yes." The young woman looked sympathetic. "I heard the committee talking earlier. They seem to think, well, they seem to have already made up their minds about you." "I see," Sister Agnes said. "Thank you for telling me." The young woman hesitated, then sat down in the chair next to Sister Agnes. "My grandmother was a pianist," she said. "She taught me that music doesn't have an expiration date. Some of the most beautiful performances I ever heard came from her, even when her hands were old and she couldn't play as fast as she used to." Sister Agnes smiled. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." At 7 o'clock sharp, Sister Agnes returned to the community center. The building was much quieter now, with only a few evening classes in session down the hallway. Father Rodriguez was waiting for her in the main audition room, sitting alone at the long table where the committee had spent 2 days evaluating performers. "Thank you for coming, Sister Agnes," he said, standing as she entered. "I hope you don't mind, but I asked Mrs. Henderson and Professor Williams to stay as well. They should be here any moment." Sister Agnes felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "Of course, Father. I appreciate any opportunity to be heard." A few minutes later, Mrs. Henderson and Professor Williams arrived, both looking somewhat reluctant. Mrs. Henderson had changed from her formal audition attire into more casual clothes, but she still carried herself with the same air of authority. Professor Williams looked tired after the long day of auditions. "Sister," Mrs. Henderson said as they took their seats, "Father Rodriguez has convinced us to give you a few minutes, but I want to be clear that this is not an official audition. The program is already full and we have made our selections." "I understand," Sister Agnes replied. "I am simply grateful for the chance to share my music with you." She walked to the piano that sat in the corner of the room. It was not a particularly fine instrument, a serviceable upright that was used for community events and children's recitals. Sister Agnes had played on much better pianos in her youth, and on much worse ones during her years at the convent. The quality of the instrument had never mattered to her as much as the music itself. She sat on the bench and adjusted her habit slightly, then placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she paused, feeling the familiar texture of the ivory keys under her fingertips. In that moment, 63 years seemed to melt away, and she was once again Catherine Walsh, the young woman who had dreamed of sharing her music with the world. But she was also Sister Agnes, the woman who had spent decades learning that the most beautiful music came not from technical perfection, but from a heart that had been broken and healed, that had known loss and found joy, that had learned to find God in the spaces between the notes. She began to play. The piece she had chosen was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a work she had first learned as a teenager and had returned to countless times over the years. It was not the most technically demanding piece in her repertoire, but it was one that allowed her to express the full depth of her musical understanding. The first notes flowed from the piano like water, gentle and clear. Sister Agnes's fingers, despite their age, moved with a precision and grace that spoke of decades of careful practice. But it was not just technical skill that filled the room. It was something deeper, something that made the 3 committee members sit up straighter in their chairs. Mrs. Henderson had been prepared to listen politely for a few minutes before finding a tactful way to end the session. But as the melody developed, she found herself genuinely captivated. There was something in the way Sister Agnes shaped each phrase, the way she allowed silence to speak as eloquently as sound, that spoke of a musical maturity she had not expected. Professor Williams, who had heard hundreds of students and professionals play this same piece over the years, recognized immediately that he was listening to something special. The technical execution was flawless, but more than that, there was an emotional depth to the performance that came only from a lifetime of truly understanding music. Father Rodriguez, who had hoped that Sister Agnes might prove competent enough to earn a small spot in the program, realized within the first minute that he was witnessing something extraordinary. As Sister Agnes moved into the more complex middle section of the nocturne, her playing became even more nuanced. She brought out inner voices in the harmony that most pianists missed entirely, creating layers of meaning within the music. Her use of the pedal was so subtle and sophisticated that the piano seemed to sing rather than merely play. The room was completely silent except for the music. Even the sounds from the evening classes down the hall seemed to fade away. Sister Agnes was no longer aware of her audience, no longer conscious of being judged or evaluated. She was simply sharing a conversation she had been having with this music for over 60 years, a conversation that had deepened and grown richer with each passing decade. When she reached the final section of the piece, Sister Agnes allowed the tempo to relax slightly, as if the music itself was settling into a peaceful rest. The last notes faded into silence, and for a long moment no one in the room moved or spoke. Finally, Professor Williams cleared his throat. "Sister Agnes," he said, and his voice was slightly hoarse, that was quite remarkable." Mrs. Henderson was staring at Sister Agnes with an expression of complete bewilderment. "I don't understand," she said. "How is this possible? Where did you learn to play like that?" Sister Agnes turned on the piano bench to face them. "I told you that I had professional training," she said simply. "Perhaps you thought I was exaggerating." "But that level of musical interpretation," Professor Williams said, leaning forward in his chair, "that doesn't come from training alone. That comes from years of serious musical study and performance experience." "Yes," Sister Agnes agreed, "it does." Father Rodriguez was the first to recover his composure. "Sister Agnes, I think we need to know more about your background. You said you performed professionally before entering religious life. Can you tell us more about that?" Sister Agnes had spent so many years keeping her past private that sharing it now felt strange. But she could see that these three people, who had dismissed her so easily just days before, were now genuinely interested in understanding who she really was. "My name before I took my vows was Catherine Walsh," she began. "I grew up in the city, and my parents sacrificed a great deal to pay for my musical education. By the time I was 20, I was performing regularly in concert halls throughout the region. I had been accepted to several prestigious music schools." "What happened?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "Why did you give it up?" Sister Agnes smiled gently. "I did not give it up. I simply found a different way to serve. My parents became ill and I needed to support them. During that time I discovered that there were other ways to use my gifts, ways that felt more meaningful to me than performing for applause." "But surely," Professor Williams said, "you must have missed the concert stage, the recognition, the career you could have had." "I missed the music," Sister Agnes admitted, "but I never stopped playing. Every evening for 63 years I have practiced in our chapel. I have learned new pieces, maintained my technique, and continued to grow as a musician. I simply did it without an audience." Mrs. Henderson was shaking her head slowly. "I owe you an apology, Sister Agnes. We completely misjudged you. What you just played, that was concert quality performance. That was professional level." "It was beyond professional level," Professor Williams added. "That was artistry. Pure artistry." Father Rodriguez stood up and walked over to the piano. "Sister Agnes, would you be willing to play another piece? I think we need to hear more before we can fully appreciate what we have discovered here." Sister Agnes nodded and turned back to the keyboard. This time she chose something more challenging, a Bach invention that required both hands to play completely independent melodic lines. As she began to play, she could feel the attention of her small audience intensify even further. The Bach was followed by a gentle Irish folk song that she arranged herself, then by a section of a Mozart sonata that showcased her technical precision. With each piece, it became clearer to the three committee members that they were not just listening to a competent amateur or even a skilled professional. They were listening to someone who had dedicated her entire life to understanding music at its deepest level. When Sister Agnes finally stopped playing, the room fell into another long silence. This time it was Mrs. Henderson who spoke first. "Sister Agnes," she said, "I need to ask you something directly. Would you be willing to perform in our concert? Not as a last-minute addition or a novelty act, but as one of our featured performers?" Sister Agnes felt her heart skip a beat. "You would want me to perform?" "Want you to perform?" Professor Williams laughed, but it was a laugh of amazement rather than amusement. "Sister Agnes, You may be the most accomplished musician we have auditioned. The question is not whether we want you to perform. The question is whether you would be willing to do it." Sister Agnes looked at the three faces watching her expectantly. 2 days ago, these same people had dismissed her without even listening to her play. Now they were offering her exactly what she had hoped for. But more than that, they were offering her the chance to use her gift in service of something larger than herself. The money raised by this concert would give children the same opportunity for musical education that her own parents had given her so many years ago. "Yes," she said quietly, "I would be honored to perform." Father Rodriguez clapped his hands together. "Wonderful. This is going to be quite a surprise for our audience." Mrs. Henderson was already pulling out her phone. "I need to call the bishop immediately, and the publicity committee, and—" She paused and looked at Sister Agnes with a slightly mischievous smile. "Sister Agnes, do—" The story spread through the diocese like wildfire. Within 3 days of Sister Agnes's impromptu audition, Father Rodriguez had shared the news with Bishop Harrison, who immediately called Mother Superior at St. Mary's Convent. The conversation left Mother Superior staring at the phone in amazement long after the bishop had hung up. "Sister Agnes," she called, finding the elderly nun in the garden as usual, tending to her beloved roses. "We need to talk." Sister Agnes looked up from the flower bed where she was carefully pruning dead blooms. She could tell from Mother Superior's expression that something significant had happened. "Is everything all right?" Sister Agnes asked, setting down her gardening shears. "That depends on how you define all right," Mother Superior replied with a mixture of bewilderment and amusement. "I just received a very interesting phone call from Bishop Harrison. It seems that the concert committee is calling you one of the most remarkable musicians they have ever encountered." Sister Agnes felt her cheeks warm. "They were very kind." "Kind?" Mother Superior sat down on the small garden bench nearby. "Sister Agnes, they want to feature you as the headline performer. They are talking about changing the entire format of the concert to highlight your performance." Bishop Harrison used the word miraculous 3 times during our conversation. The other sisters had begun to gather around, drawn by the unusual sight of Mother Superior sitting in the garden in the middle of the afternoon, engaged in what appeared to be a very serious conversation with Sister Agnes. "What's happening?" Sister Patricia asked, her young face bright with curiosity. Mother Superior looked around at the assembled community, 12 women who had lived together for years, sharing meals and prayers and the simple rhythms of religious life. "It appears," she said slowly, "that we have been living with a celebrity and never knew it." The story came out piece by piece over the following hour. Sister Agnes, clearly uncomfortable with the attention but unable to avoid it any longer, found herself sharing details of her previous life that she had kept private for over 6 decades. "Catherine Walsh," Sister Joan repeated, her eyes wide. "You were Catherine Walsh? The pianist? You've heard of her?" Mother Superior asked, surprised. "My grandmother had one of her recordings," Sister Joan explained. "She used to play it all the time when I was little. She always said Catherine Walsh was the most promising young pianist of her generation, and then she just disappeared. Grandmother wondered for years what had happened to her." Sister Agnes smiled sadly. "I did not disappear. I simply chose a different path." Sister Patricia, who at 28 was too young to remember Catherine Walsh's brief career, was full of questions. "But why didn't you ever tell us? All these years we thought you were just an ordinary nun who liked gardening." Sister Agnes finished gently. "That is exactly what I wanted you to think. When I came here, I wanted to leave Catherine Walsh behind completely. I wanted to become someone new." "But you kept playing," Mother Superior observed. "Every evening in the chapel." "I could not give up the music entirely," Sister Agnes admitted. "It was too much a part of who I was. But I thought of it as my private conversation with God. I never intended for anyone else to hear it again." Sister Catherine, who was in her 50s and had been at the convent for 20 years, shook her head in amazement. "Do you realize how many evenings I have walked past the chapel and heard you playing? I always thought it was beautiful, but I assumed you were self-taught." "In a way I was," Sister Agnes said. "Everything I learned about music after joining the community, I learned on my own. New pieces, new techniques, new ways of understanding the compositions I had played in my youth. Music is not something you master once and then possess forever. It is something you grow into, year by year, if you are willing to keep learning." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a car in the convent's small parking area. Through the garden gate, they could see a well-dressed man getting out of a luxury sedan, followed by a woman carrying what appeared to be professional camera equipment. "Oh my," Mother Superior sighed. "I think our quiet life is about to get much more complicated." The man introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, the director of marketing for the diocese's music program. The woman was a photographer from the city's largest newspaper. "Sister Agnes," Mr. Thompson said, his voice filled with excitement. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but this story is creating quite a sensation. The newspaper wants to do a feature article about you, and we think it could help enormously with ticket sales for the concert." Sister Agnes looked uncomfortable. "I am not sure that is necessary. The important thing is raising money for the children's music programs." "Exactly," Mr. Thompson agreed enthusiastically. "And your story is going to help us raise far more money than we ever imagined. Do you realize that people are already calling this the most significant cultural event our city has seen in years?" The photographer, a professional woman in her 30s, approached Sister Agnes with a gentle smile. "Sister, I promise we will be very respectful. We just want to capture who you are, the person behind this remarkable story." What followed was the strangest afternoon of Sister Agnes's long life. The photographer took pictures of her in the garden, at the piano in the chapel, and sitting quietly in prayer. The newspaper reporter, a thoughtful young man who had clearly done his research, asked questions that showed he understood something about both music and religious life. "What I find most remarkable," the reporter said, "is not just that you maintained your musical skills during 63 years of religious life, but that you actually seem to have continued developing as an artist. The committee members I interviewed said your playing showed a depth and maturity that could only come from a lifetime of musical growth." Sister Agnes considered this carefully. "I think," she said finally, "that music and faith have more in common than people might realize. Both require you to listen for something beyond yourself. Both ask you to surrender your ego in service of something larger. The years I have spent in prayer and service have not taken me away from music. They have led me deeper into it." The reporter scribbled notes furiously. "Can you tell me about your decision to leave your concert career? That must have been an incredibly difficult choice." Sister Agnes was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the garden where she had spent so many peaceful mornings. "When I was young," she said, "I thought music was about me, about my talent, my career, my success. It took me years to understand that the gift was never mine to begin with. I was simply entrusted with it, like a gardener is entrusted with seeds. My job was not to own the gift, but to nurture it and share it when the time was right." "And you think the time is right now?" "I think," Sister Agnes replied with a gentle smile, "that God has a sense of timing that is far better than mine." By evening, word of the newspaper article had spread throughout the local music community. Professor Williams called to tell them that the university's music department was buzzing with excitement. Mrs. Henderson reported that several prominent musicians from the city had called to ask if they could attend the concert, even if only as audience members. But the most surprising call came just as the sisters were sitting down to dinner. Mother Superior answered the phone to find herself speaking with Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, the current director of the prestigious conservatory where Catherine Walsh had been offered a scholarship 64 years earlier. "I cannot believe it," Dr. Morgan said, her voice filled with excitement. "Catherine Walsh is alive and well and living in a convent 2 hours from here? This is incredible. We have a display about her in our Hall of Fame. She is considered one of the great what-if stories in American classical music." Mother Superior looked across the dining room at Sister Agnes, who was quietly eating her soup while the other sisters peppered her with questions about her upcoming performance. "She goes by Sister Agnes now," Mother Superior said gently, "and she has lived a very full and meaningful life even without the concert career she might have had." Of course," Dr. Morgan said quickly. "I did not mean to imply otherwise. But the music world has wondered about her for decades. There are collectors who pay hundreds of dollars for recordings of her early performances. To know that she has been playing all these years, continuing to develop as an artist, it is extraordinary. Would you like to speak with her?" Mother Superior offered. "Could I? I promise I would not take much of her time." Sister Agnes accepted the phone with some reluctance. The conversation that followed was unlike any she had experienced in her religious life. Dr. Morgan spoke to her as one musician to another, asking technical questions about her practice routine, her repertoire, and her musical philosophy that no one at the convent could possibly understand. "Sister Agnes," Dr. Morgan said finally, "I know this might sound presumptuous, but after the concert, would you consider visiting our conservatory? Our students would be honored to hear you play, and frankly, I think you might enjoy meeting some of the young musicians who are following the path you once walked." Sister Agnes looked around the simple dining room where she had eaten thousands of meals, surrounded by the women who had been her family for over 60 years. The Cathedral of St. Matthew had never seen anything like it. By 6 o'clock on the evening of the concert, 3 hours before the scheduled start time, a line of people stretched around the entire city block. Families with children pressed against the barriers that had been hastily erected, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the musicians arriving for soundcheck. Inside the cathedral, the transformation was breathtaking. The ancient stone walls built over a century ago had been softly lit with professional lighting that made the stained glass windows glow like jewels. The altar area had been converted into a performance space, with a magnificent concert grand piano taking center stage. Sister Agnes stood in the small preparation room behind the altar, looking out through a crack in the heavy wooden door at the gathering crowd. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched people finding their seats, their voices creating a low hum of excitement that filled the vast space. "Nervous?" asked Father Rodriguez, who had been checking on all the performers throughout the afternoon. "Terrified," Sister Agnes admitted with a small laugh. "I have not performed for an audience in 64 years. I am not sure I remember how." "From what I heard at your audition," Father Rodriguez said gently, "I do not think you have anything to worry about. But tell me, what is frightening you most?" Sister Agnes was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think," she said finally, "I am afraid of disappointing them. All these people have heard the story. They have read the newspaper articles. They have built up expectations. What if I am not what they hope I will be?" Father Rodriguez smiled. "Sister Agnes, do you remember why you are here tonight?" "To raise money for children's music programs." "Exactly. You're not here to prove anything to anyone or to live up to anyone's expectations. You are here to share your gift in service of something larger than yourself, just as you have been doing every evening in our chapel for the past 63 years. Sister Agnes nodded, feeling some of her anxiety ease. "You are right, of course. This is not about me. It is about you," Father Rodriguez corrected gently, "but not in the way you are afraid of. It is about you sharing the person you have become through all these years of faith and practice and service. Trust that person, Sister Agnes. She knows what she is doing." Outside, the cathedral continued to fill. The original estimate of 500 attendees had been exceeded within hours of tickets going on sale. They had added additional seating, then more. By evening, over 1,200 people packed the ancient building. In the front rows sat the city's most prominent citizens, the mayor and his wife, several members of the city council, wealthy patrons of the arts, and professors from the local university. But scattered throughout the crowd were faces that told a different story. Elderly people who remembered Catherine Walsh from her brief career decades ago, children who had been brought by parents hoping to inspire them with music, and families who had scraped together money for tickets because they believed in the cause. Mrs. Henderson, elegant in an evening gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, moved through the crowd greeting important guests. But even she seemed affected by the unusual energy in the cathedral that night. "I have been organizing cultural events in this city for 20 years, she confided to Professor Williams, "and I have never seen anything like this. Look at these people. They are not here just for entertainment. They are here because they believe they are about to witness something special." Professor Williams nodded, adjusting his bow tie nervously. "I keep thinking about that evening when she played for us privately. Even then, I knew we were hearing something extraordinary. But this," he gestured at the packed cathedral, "this feels like it is about much more than one concert." The evening began with a brief welcome from Bishop Harrison, who spoke about the importance of music education and thanked the community for their support. Then came the first performers, a string quartet from the university, followed by a young soprano who had recently graduated from the State Conservatory. Each performance was met with enthusiastic applause, But Sister Agnes could sense that the audience was waiting. She was scheduled to perform last, and she could feel the anticipation building as the evening progressed. Finally, Father Rodriguez stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "our final performer tonight needs no introduction from me. Her story has touched hearts throughout our community and beyond. But what you may not know is that Sister Agnes has asked that her performance tonight be dedicated to all the children who will benefit from the music programs your generosity will fund. She wants you to know that every note she plays tonight is played for them." The applause that followed was unlike anything the cathedral had heard before. It started as polite recognition but quickly grew into something deeper, a sustained, emotional outpouring that seemed to come from 1,200 hearts simultaneously moved by the same spirit. Sister Agnes made her way slowly from the preparation room to the piano. She had chosen to wear her simple gray habit, the same style she had worn for over 60 years. In the dramatic lighting of the performance space surrounded by the grandeur of the cathedral, she looked both humble and profound. As she settled onto the piano bench, the vast space fell into complete silence. Sister Agnes closed her eyes for a moment, saying a brief prayer, then placed her hands on the keys. She began with Bach, the same invention she had played for the committee members, but tonight it seemed to carry additional layers of meaning. The two independent melodic lines wove together like a conversation between old friends, each voice clear and distinct yet part of a greater whole. The acoustics of the cathedral were perfect for the piano, carrying every subtle gradation of sound to the furthest corners of the building. People in the back rows could hear not just the notes, but the breathing space between them. The way Sister Agnes shaped each phrase with the wisdom of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to listen. After the Bach, she moved into Chopin, not the nocturne she had played at her audition, but a more complex ballade that showcased both her technical skill and her deep emotional understanding of the music. As the piece built to its dramatic climax, some people in the audience found themselves holding their breath. But it was her third selection that truly transformed the evening. Sister Agnes had arranged a traditional hymn, Amazing Grace, in a way that honored both its spiritual message and its potential for musical expression. She began with a simple statement of the melody, then gradually added layers of harmony and complexity that turned the familiar tune into something entirely new. As she played, something remarkable began to happen in the cathedral. The audience, which had been listening with respectful attention, began to be drawn into the music in a way that transcended mere performance. Some people found themselves moved to tears by memories the hymn evoked. Others experienced a sense of peace they had not felt in years. Sister Agnes, completely absorbed in the music, was unaware of the effect she was having on her listeners. She was simply sharing a conversation she had been having with this hymn for decades, a meditation on grace and forgiveness and the possibility of transformation that lay at the heart of her faith. When the last notes faded into the cathedral's ancient stones, the silence that followed was profound. For a long moment no one moved. Then slowly the applause began, not the enthusiastic clapping that had followed the other performances, but something deeper and more reverent. People stood, one by one, then in groups until the entire cathedral was on its feet. But even standing, many continued to clap softly, as if they understood that they had witnessed something that demanded respect rather than mere enthusiasm. Sister Agnes remained seated at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had expected polite appreciation, perhaps some genuine enjoyment of the music. She had not expected this. 1,200 people united in what felt less like appreciation for a performance than recognition of a shared spiritual experience. Finally, Bishop Harrison approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his own voice slightly hoarse with emotion, "I think we can all agree that we have witnessed something truly special tonight. But before Sister Agnes leaves us, I believe she has something she would like to say." Sister Agnes stood slowly and walked to the microphone. Looking out at the sea of faces, she felt a moment of panic. She had not planned to speak. She had assumed her music would say everything that needed to be said. But as she looked at the audience, at the elderly couple in the third row who were holding hands and crying softly, at the young girl in the balcony whose eyes were wide with wonder, at the businessman in the expensive suit who had forgotten to check his phone for the entire evening, she knew what she needed to say. "Thank you," she began, her voice gentle but carrying clearly through the cathedral sound system. When I was a young woman, I thought music was about talent and technique and recognition. Tonight I have learned that music is really about connection. The connection between performer and audience. Between one heart and another, between all of us and something larger than ourselves. She paused, looking around the vast space filled with upturned faces. Rebecca Chen had been scrolling through her phone during her lunch break when she first saw the video. A co-worker had shared it with the caption, "You have to see this. Elderly nun plays piano and it's absolutely incredible." Rebecca almost scrolled past it. She received dozens of viral videos every day, and most of them disappointed her. But something about the image caught her attention. The small elderly woman in the simple gray habit sitting at a grand piano in what appeared to be a cathedral. Rebecca tapped play. 20 minutes later, she was still sitting in her cubicle, tears streaming down her face. She had watched the entire performance without moving, completely captivated by what she was hearing. The Bach was technically perfect, the Chopin was emotionally devastating, but it was the arrangement of amazing grace that had broken her completely. Without thinking, Rebecca hit the share button and added her own comment. "I don't know anything about classical music, but this is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Rebecca had no way of knowing that she was one of hundreds of people sharing the video that day, or that her small act of digital appreciation would contribute to something unprecedented in the history of social media. The video had been recorded by Thomas Bradley, a local musician who had attended the concert with his wife. Thomas had initially planned to record just a few minutes as a personal memory, but as Sister Agnes began playing, he found himself capturing the entire performance. When he uploaded it to various social platforms that night, he expected maybe a few dozen views from friends and family. By the next morning, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. By afternoon, it had reached 500,000. By the end of the week, over 10 million people around the world had watched Sister Agnes play piano in the Cathedral of St. Matthew. The comment section became a phenomenon in itself. People from every continent shared their reactions, many describing how the performance had moved them to tears or inspired them in ways they struggled to put into words. "I'm a professional musician and I've never heard Bach played with such soul," wrote someone from Germany. "My grandmother used to play piano like this. I haven't thought about her in years, but this brought back all the memories," shared a woman from Japan. "I don't believe in God, but listening to this makes me understand why some people do," commented a user from Australia. The video caught the attention of classical music critics, who began writing lengthy articles analyzing Sister Agnes's technique and interpretation. Dr. Patricia Steinberg, a renowned musicologist from Vienna, published a piece titled "The Accidental Master: How a Hidden Genius Redefined Late-Life Artistry." "What we are witnessing," Dr. Steinberg wrote, "is not simply an elderly woman who maintained her musical skills, but an artist who continued to evolve and deepen her understanding of music throughout 7 decades of life." The performance shows a level of musical maturity that can only come from someone who has truly lived with these pieces, who has found new meaning in them through years of contemplation and spiritual growth. Major news networks picked up the story. CNN featured a segment titled "The Nun Who Stunned the World." The BBC created a documentary about hidden talent in religious communities. Even networks in countries where English was not the primary language ran stories about the remarkable elderly nun from America. But it was not just the music world that took notice. The story resonated with people from all walks of life, touching on themes that transcended cultural and religious boundaries. Churches around the world reported increased attendance as people sought to experience something similar to what they had seen in the video. Music schools saw a surge in enrollment from older adults who had been inspired by Sister Agnes's example. Retirement communities began organizing piano recitals and musical events. The video reached Maria Santos, a 67-year-old grandmother in Mexico City, who had given up playing violin 50 years earlier when she got married and started raising children. After watching Sister Agnes perform, Maria dug her old violin out of the closet and began practicing again. Within 6 months, she was performing with a community orchestra for seniors. It reached David Park, a businessman in Seoul who had been struggling with depression after losing his job. Something about Sister Agnes's serene confidence at the piano inspired him to return to the guitar he had abandoned in college. Music became his pathway back to emotional health. It reached thousands of children whose parents, moved by the performance, decided to invest in music lessons they had previously considered too expensive or impractical. The financial impact was equally remarkable. The original concert had raised $2 million for children's music programs, but the viral video generated an additional wave of donations from around the world. People who had never heard of the Diocese of St. Matthew were sending money to support music, education in their community. A crowdfunding campaign started by inspired viewers raised another $5 million in just 3 weeks. The money was used to establish music programs in schools across 3 states, providing instruments and instruction to thousands of children who otherwise would never have had the opportunity. Sister Agnes, meanwhile, was struggling to adjust to her sudden fame. The convent's phone rang constantly with requests for interviews, concert bookings, and speaking engagements. Reporters showed up at the gates hoping for a glimpse of the woman who had captured the world's attention. "I do not understand it," Sister Agnes confided to Mother Superior as they walked through the garden one morning, trying to escape the chaos. "I played the same pieces I have been playing for years. Why is everyone so surprised?" Mother Superior smiled. "Sister Agnes, I think you may be the only person who does not understand the gift you shared that night. You gave people something they did not even know they were missing." "What do you mean?" "In a world full of noise and distraction and artificial entertainment, you offered them something real, something that came from the deepest part of your soul, refined by decades of faith and practice and genuine life experience. People are starving for authenticity, and you gave them the most authentic thing they had ever encountered." The international attention led to some unexpected connections. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan from the conservatory called to tell them that the school's alumni association was planning to award Sister Agnes an honorary doctorate in music, their first ever, given to someone who had never formally attended the institution. Catherine Walsh, Sister Agnes represents everything we hope our students will become, Dr. Morgan explained. Not just technically proficient musicians, but artists who understand that music is ultimately about serving something larger than oneself. More surprising was the call from the Chopin Institute in Warsaw, informing them that Sister Agnes had been invited to perform at their annual festival. Similar invitations came from concert halls in Vienna, London, and New York. Sister Agnes turned them all down. "I am honored by the recognition," she explained to a disappointed booking agent from Carnegie Hall, "but I'm not interested in a concert career at my age. The performance at our cathedral was meaningful because it served a specific purpose. I do not need to repeat it around the world," the agent persisted. "Sister Agnes, you could fill concert halls anywhere in the world. The demand is unprecedented." "I am sure it is," Sister Agnes replied gently. "But filling concert halls was never my goal. My goal was to help children have access to music education. That goal has been achieved beyond my wildest dreams. I have no need for anything more." Her refusal to capitalize on her fame only added to her mystique. Articles appeared with headlines like "The Nun Who Said No to Stardom" and "Sister Agnes the Anti-Celebrity." But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. 3 months after the concert, Sister Agnes received a handwritten letter that had been forwarded through the diocese's main office. The envelope was addressed simply to the Piano Nun USA, and somehow it had found its way to her. The letter was from 8-year-old Anna Kowalski, who lived in a small town in Poland. Anna's English was careful and halting, clearly written with help from someone older. "Dear Sister Agnes," the letter began, "my grandmother showed me your video on the computer. She cried when she watched it because she said you played piano like her grandmother used to play many years ago, before the war. My grandmother said your music sounds like someone who has lived a long life and learned important things. I'm starting to learn piano now because I saw you playing and I want to make music that makes people feel happy like yours did. Thank you for showing me that music can be more than just notes. I hope when I am old like you I will play with as much love as you do." Sister Agnes read the letter 3 times, then sat quietly in her room for a long while. This was why her gift had been preserved all these years. Not for fame or recognition or even for the money raised for music programs, important as that was. It was for children like Anna, who could see in her example that music was not just about entertainment or achievement, but about connection and love and the expression of the deepest parts of the human spirit. That evening, Sister Agnes wrote back to Anna, beginning a correspondence that would continue for years. She also began responding to some of the thousands of other letters that had arrived from around the world.